On my 18th birthday, my stepmother slid a card across the kitchen island. "Make a wish," she wrote in a looping hand, in the garage. Her smile stiffened. The door hissed shut, and her knuckles did the talking. 15 years later, in a glass-walled boardroom 38 floors above North Alder, she leaned close and whispered the same words, "Make a wish," right before the vote to end my career. She didn't know I had saved a present all this time. A voice, a pattern, and a paper trail that began in that garage. My name is Harper Cole. 15 years ago, that name meant nothing. Today, on the 38th floor of the Iron Vale Logistics Tower, it's a name associated with a certain kind of clinical precision, an almost inhuman ability to calculate risk. They don't know the truth. They don't know that my entire career, this glass-walled cage I've built for myself, is just a tool, a weapon forged over a decade and a half, waiting for one specific moment, and that moment is now. The air in the boardroom is recycled and smells faintly of expensive leather and fear. Veronica Maddox, my stepmother, is leaning over the polished mahogany, her face a mask of feigned concern. Her perfume, a cloying bergamot scent she's worn for 2 decades, cuts through the sterile air. It's the same scent that filled our house in Crest Hollow, a sprawling suburban tomb where my 18th birthday began. Flashback. Crest Hollow, 15 years ago. The kitchen was aggressively white, a monument to Veronica's taste for things that looked clean but felt cold. On the morning of my 18th birthday, she slid a thick, cream-colored card across the marble island. The silence was broken only by the hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. I picked it up. Her handwriting, a series of elegant, self-important loops in dark blue ink, filled the inside. "Make a wish," it said. There was no happy birthday, no love, just that command, posing as a kindness. Even then, I knew her kindness was a currency she spent only when she expected a greater return. I was already Harper Cole, a quiet, watchful 17-year-old on the cusp of legal adulthood, and I had been studying her for years. I knew her patterns, her tells. Chief among them was her habit of verbal repetition. Certain phrases were crutches for her manipulation, deployed like tactical weapons. "Make a wish." "Family is leverage." "We'll sort it out." They were keys to the locks of her deceit. That's why, tucked into the pocket of my jeans, was my father's old microcassette recorder, a relic from his journalism days. Small, silver, and beautifully simple. Record, play, stop. I had pressed the small red button moments before entering the kitchen, the faint whir of the tape a secret humming against my hip. I wanted to capture one of her phrases. Just one, a specimen. I didn't know what I'd do with it, but instinct told me to collect it, an archivist of my own misery. I gave her a thin, practiced smile. "Thanks." Her own smile didn't reach her eyes. They were the color of faded denim, assessing and cold. "I have your real present downstairs. Let's go to the garage. Just us. We need to have a private talk about your future." The way she said "future" made it sound like a diagnosis. I followed her, my hand instinctively pressing against the recorder in my pocket, ensuring it was safe. The door to the garage swung open, and the smell hit me first. A nauseating cocktail of gasoline, damp concrete, and the synthetic citrus of the little tree-shaped air freshener dangling from the rear-view mirror of her sedan. It's a scent profile burned into my memory, one that can still, on a bad day, make my stomach clench. She pulled the door shut behind us, and then, with a deliberate press of a button on the wall, the main garage door began its slow, groaning descent. The world outside was sliced away, strip by strip, until the only light came from a single, fly-specked fluorescent bulb overhead. It hummed like a trapped insect. The sound of the heavy door locking into place was a period on a sentence I didn't want to read. She turned to face me, her silhouette stark against the metal door. She started to walk toward me, slowly, her heels clicking on the stained concrete. Then she began to tap her fingernails, long, perfectly manicured, a shade of blood red, against the corrugated metal wall. Click, click, click. It was a rhythm, a countdown. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against her methodical tapping. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she said, her voice a low purr that did nothing to hide the venom beneath. "You think turning 18 means you're free." I stood my ground, my fingers curling into a fist in my pocket, my knuckles pressing against the hard plastic of the recorder. The world seemed to narrow to the space between us, thick with unspoken history and the smell of gasoline. She stopped just inches from me. I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the tightness in her jaw. She leaned in, her breath smelling of coffee and that bergamot perfume. Her voice dropped to a whisper, the same whisper I would hear again 15 years later across a boardroom table. "Make a wish, Harper." And then her hands were on me. It wasn't a punch in the way you see in movies. It was something more intimate, more dismissive. It was a violent shove, her knuckles digging into my collarbone, sending me stumbling backward. My head connected with the drywall next to the tool bench with a dull thud. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and the air rushed out of my lungs in a gasp. In that chaotic moment of impact and pain, my body's only instinct was to protect the device in my pocket. I curled into myself as I fell, my left arm shielding my side, my hand a rigid claw around the recorder. The pain was sharp, but the humiliation was sharper. She stood over me, not with rage, but with a look of cold satisfaction. "Happy birthday," she said, her voice even. Then she turned, pressed the button, and the garage door began to rise, flooding the space with mocking sunlight. Adrenaline is a mercilessly clear-headed drug. I scrambled to my feet, my vision swimming. I didn't run for the house. I ran for my father's car, a beat-up sedan he never locked. My hands shook as I slid into the driver's seat, fumbling the keys from my pocket. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, gasping for air, and pulled out the recorder. I pressed stop. Then, with a trembling finger, I pressed rewind for a few seconds, and then play. It was a mess of sound. The rustle of my jeans, the heavy thud of the door, her clicking nails, and then, through the static, my own ragged, panicked breath, followed by 4 words, clear and cold as ice, her voice, "Make a wish," then the sound of the shove, the gasp of my breath, and a final click as I must have hit the wall. 27 seconds, that was all. 27 seconds of proof. When I confronted my father later that day, my voice shaking, the faint bruise on the back of my head already tender to the touch. He didn't believe me. He couldn't. Veronica, summoned to the study, put on the performance of a lifetime. Her eyes filled with crystalline tears as she clutched his arm, her voice breaking as she painted me as a volatile, ungrateful drama queen seeking attention on my birthday. My father, a good man blinded by a clever woman, looked at me with disappointment. "Harper, apologize to Veronica," he said. I didn't. I walked out of the room, out of the house, and back to the old sedan. I opened the glove compartment, pushed aside old insurance papers and a tire pressure gauge, and placed the microcassette inside. It was the only birthday present I received that day that wasn't a lie. It was a gift from her, though she didn't know it. A weapon, a promise. I sat there for a long time as the sun set over Crest Hollow, the sky turning the color of a fading bruise, and I made a vow to myself, a silent promise whispered into the dusty confines of my father's car. One day, Veronica, you'll say that phrase again, and when you do, it won't be a threat whispered in the dark. It will be an admission. It will open another garage door, the one that leads straight to your own personal hell, and I will be the one holding the key. Present day, the boardroom. And so, the board feels an investigative leave is the only prudent course of action. Harper, the voice of Julius Maddox, Veronica's second husband and my current CEO, pulls me from the memory. His eyes, however, won't meet mine. They're fixed on a point somewhere over my left shoulder. Veronica stands beside him, a portrait of solemn duty. The scent of her bergamot perfume is stronger now. My focus returns. The garage is gone, replaced by glass and steel, but the feeling is identical. The door hissing shut, the walls closing in, the countdown. She didn't know I had saved a present all this time. 27 seconds of tape, tucked away for 15 years, waiting for the wish she was about to grant me. My father's death, when I was 21, was not an event of dramatic, cinematic grief. It was a quiet closing of a door, a sudden silence in a house that had long been filled with unspoken tensions. He had a heart attack on the golf course, a tragically mundane end for a man who had once been so full of life. At the funeral, Veronica's performance was impeccable. She was the grieving widow, clad in tasteful black silk, leaning on the arm of a man I'd only met once or twice, Julius Maddox. He was tall, with a mane of silver hair and the predatory stillness of a man who owned rooms the moment he entered them. He was the founder and CEO of Iron Veil Logistics. 6 months later, she was Veronica Maddox, and they had moved into a penthouse in the glittering, ruthless city of North Alder. I was left with a modest trust fund and the suffocating freedom that comes from being truly alone. I didn't crumble. I did the opposite. I weaponized my solitude. I poured every ounce of my energy into my education, then into my career. My field of study was not chosen by passion, but by necessity: risk management and forensic accounting. I learned to see the world not as a place of people and emotions, but as a system of interconnected variables, potential liabilities, and exploitable loopholes. I treated my life like a balance sheet, ruthlessly cutting emotional losses and reinvesting everything into the acquisition of skills. I learned to speak the language of numbers because numbers, unlike people, could not lie. By the time I was 28, I had maneuvered my way into a position as the head of risk at Iron Veil Logistics. Working for my stepmother's new husband was a calculated move. It was the strategic equivalent of positioning my queen right in the center of the board. Iron Veil was a cold, brutalist empire of shipping containers, freight schedules, and razor-thin margins. The entire company operated with the relentless, inhuman precision of a ticking clock. A place where a 5-minute delay in a port on the other side of the world could cascade into $1 million loss. I thrived in that environment. I was good at my job because I understood that the greatest risks are never in the supply chain. They are in the flawed, greedy hearts of the people who run it. Veronica did not re-enter my life with a dramatic confrontation. Her arrival at Iron Veil was a quiet infiltration. One day, a memo announced the creation of a new, vaguely defined role: Special Advisor to the Chairman on Personnel and Culture. She had no official title on the organizational chart, no direct reports, but her power was absolute and immediate. She was a ghost in the corporate machine. Her influence felt in sudden departmental restructurings, in promotions for loyalists, and in the quiet disappearances of those who questioned her. Her office was next to Julius's, a silent testament to where the real power lay. She loved to hold court at company galas, a glass of champagne in her hand, dispensing what she considered wisdom. I once overheard her talking to a new vice president. "You have to remember," she'd said, her voice smooth as velvet, "family is leverage." The man nodded eagerly, misunderstanding it as a platitude about work-life balance. I heard it for what it was: a core tenet of her philosophy, the same one that had governed our lives in Crest Hollow. Family isn't a source of strength. It's a collection of vulnerabilities to be exploited, a set of hostages. Julius, for his part, seemed to appreciate my talent, if not my disposition. He once described me to the board, in my presence, as a brilliant, if stubborn, asset. He looked at me as if I were a complex piece of code, highly effective, but prone to executing my own commands. "Harper is good for the bottom line," he'd said, a thin smile on his lips. But a nightmare for politics. He was right. I had no interest in the political games of the 38th floor. I was only interested in the data, the truth, and I knew that, eventually, Veronica's truth and the company's data would collide. The catalyst arrived in the form of a rumor, a whisper in the markets that grew into a roar on Wall Street. Iron Veil Logistics was in talks to merge with Arcadium Freight. It was a colossal deal, the kind that creates dynasties. Arcadium was our biggest competitor, and a merger would create a global behemoth, rewriting the landscape of international shipping. The stock prices for both companies surged on the speculation. Julius was energized, seeing it as his legacy. Veronica saw it as the final coronation of their reign. I saw it as the single greatest risk the company had ever faced. My department began the due diligence, a deep dive into the labyrinthine finances of both corporations. It was in the ancillary expenditure reports that I first found it, a series of payments, disguised as community grants and outreach initiatives, being routed through a nonprofit organization. The amounts were significant but spaced out, designed to fly under the radar. The name of the nonprofit made the back of my neck prickle with a cold. Familiar dread. The Wishwell Foundation. It was so perfectly her, a name that sounded benevolent, masking a core of pure, cynical self-interest. The name alone was a confession. I began to dig deeper, working late into the night, my office the only one lit on the entire floor. I built a separate, encrypted file on a sandbox drive, a fortress for my findings. The money from Iron Veil went into Wishwell, but it didn't stay there. It was being dispersed in a pattern I couldn't yet decipher. But the intent was clear. This was not charity. This was a slush fund. Around the same time, Veronica's influence became more overt. Through the official HR department, she began to push a new, mandatory corporate wellness program. It was a masterpiece of benign tyranny. Employees were required to attend seminars on stress management and work-life balance, to fill out extensive surveys about their professional satisfaction and personal goals. On the surface, it was about creating a healthier work environment, but I saw the data points being collected. I saw the way the surveys subtly probed for departmental loyalties and personal anxieties, and I saw who controlled the priority list for these wellness interventions. Veronica's office. It was an intelligence-gathering operation disguised as corporate caring. She was mapping the company's human terrain, identifying threats and potential allies. Through all of this, I remained silent. My interactions with Veronica were models of professional courtesy. We would nod to each other in the hallways. We would exchange pleasantries at board meetings. She likely believed I was beaten, that my presence at Iron Veil was a sign of my capitulation, a daughter figure drawn into the orbit of her new, powerful life. She mistook my silence for submission. She was wrong. My silence was not the quiet of a victim. It was the patient, watchful quiet of a sniper. Every piece of data I collected, every suspicious transaction I flagged, every employee who was suddenly downsized after a negative wellness review, they were all rounds of ammunition I was carefully chambering. I wasn't waiting for her to make a mistake. I knew her too well for that. She was too careful. I was waiting for her to get bold. I was waiting for a moment so big, a prize so tempting, that she would be forced to take a risk she couldn't completely control. The Arcadium merger was that prize, and as the deal neared its final vote, I knew my time of silent observation was coming to an end. The girl in the garage had learned to wait. The woman on the 38th floor was ready to act. My silence was a calculated investment, and it was about to pay the dividend I had been waiting 15 years to collect. Monday morning arrived not with the slow dawn of a new week, but with the digital shiv of an email. It appeared at 7:02 a.m., a time when the 38th floor was still a ghost town of sleeping monitors and silent chairs. The subject line was brutally sterile. Urgent. Notification of investigative leave. I didn't need to open it to know the contents. I had run this exact scenario through 1,000 risk models in my head, but the models could never capture the cold, hollow feeling of seeing it in black and white. The body of the email was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, all in accordance with company policy and pending a thorough review and potential breach of partner data protocols. It accused me, in the most impersonal terms possible, of leaking sensitive information related to the Arcadium freight merger. It was a clean, precise, and utterly fabricated accusation, and at the bottom, beneath the signature of the head of Human Resources, was the true author's mark, a single, chilling line. Authorized by Veronica Maddox, Board Liaison. She hadn't even tried to hide her hand. This wasn't just a removal, it was a public execution, and she was signing the order. Before I could even close the email, my desk phone chimed. It was Julius's assistant, her voice tight with forced neutrality. "Harper, the audit committee requires your presence in the Horizon boardroom, immediately." The walk from my office to the boardroom was the longest 50 yards of my life. Every head that turned in my direction, every pair of eyes that followed me, felt like a physical weight. The whispers were already starting. The corporate ecosystem is brutally efficient at sensing blood in the water. By the time I reached the glass doors of the Horizon room, I was no longer Harper Cole, head of risk. I was a liability, a problem to be contained. The room was full, the entire audit committee, a grim-faced assembly of gray suits, sat on one side of the colossal mahogany table. Julius was at the head, looking not at me, but at a point on the wall just past my ear. Veronica stood beside him, a half step behind his chair, the position of the loyal advisor, the power behind the throne. She wore a severe navy blue dress, her expression a mask of somber responsibility. There were no greetings. The committee chair, a man named Thompson, whose defining characteristic was his complete lack of a chin, cleared his throat. "Ms. Cole, in light of serious allegations regarding data integrity, the committee has voted unanimously to place you on immediate administrative leave to secure the integrity of the investigation. We require you to surrender your company-issued laptop and phone at this time." He gestured to a waiting IT technician holding a padded evidence box. "You have 30 minutes to gather your personal belongings from your office. Security will escort you." It was swift, brutal, a corporate decapitation in under 60 seconds. My mind, the one trained to process 1,000,000 data points, to see 10 moves ahead, went strangely calm. I was no longer in a boardroom. I was in the garage. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline. The door was hissing shut. I unclipped the laptop from its docking station, my movements deliberate and steady. As I placed it on the table, Veronica moved. She walked around the table, her heels making no sound on the thick carpet, until she was standing directly behind me. The cloying, familiar scent of bergamot filled my senses. She leaned down, her lips so close to my ear I could feel the warmth of her breath. And then she whispered the words. The 4 words I had been waiting 15 years to hear her say again in a moment of triumph. "Make a wish, Harper." My eyes lifted to meet my own reflection in the vast, floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city of North Alder. The skyline was sharp and clear in the morning light, but superimposed over the view of the steel and glass towers, I saw another image, a ghost image, a girl of 18, with a faint bruise on her cheek she'd hidden with makeup, standing in the dusty light of a suburban garage, her hand clenched around a small, silver tape recorder. Her eyes in the reflection were wide, not with fear, but with a nascent, crystalline rage. In that moment, the woman of 33 and the girl of 18 were one and the same. The wish had been made long ago. This was the granting. I straightened up and turned to face her. My expression was a blank slate. I gave her nothing. I simply slid the laptop across the polished wood toward the technician. The walk back to my office, this time with 2 uniformed security guards flanking me, was a tableau of corporate shame. My assistant refused to meet my eyes, suddenly engrossed in a spreadsheet of impossible complexity. When I reached my office door, I held my access card to the panel. The light flashed red. Access denied. One of the guards swiped his own card to let me in. They were already erasing me from the system. I pulled out my personal phone. I opened my calendar. All my upcoming meetings, my project deadlines, my entire professional life for the next 6 months, wiped clean. A blank slate. I didn't take the full 30 minutes. I packed nothing but the contents of my purse. On my way out, I passed Julius, who was standing awkwardly in the hallway, pretending to be examining a piece of abstract art. "Harper," he started, his voice low, his eyes still evasive. "Listen, this is just procedure, a formality. We'll sort it out." I stopped and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. I saw not the powerful CEO, but the man who had stood by Veronica's side at my father's funeral, a man who chose convenient power over difficult truths. He was weak, and his weakness was her greatest strength. "Of course, Julius," I said, my voice perfectly level. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked with my security escort to the elevator bank. As the polished steel doors slid open, I stepped inside alone. The guards remained outside. The doors closed, sealing me in the silent, descending box. The moment they shut, I pulled out my phone. My fingers were steady. I opened a secure messaging app and selected a single contact. D. Finch, Eska, my personal lawyer, a man who knew nothing of my work at Ironvale, but everything about my history with Veronica. He was expensive, discreet, and had been on retainer for 5 years for this exact contingency. I typed a single 3-word message. Plan G, garage. I hit send. David would understand. Plan G was the most extreme protocol, the one we had designed for a scorched earth scenario. The word garage was the key, the context for everything that was about to be set in motion. It told him what evidence to unseal, which private investigators to activate, and what legal framework to prepare. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the vast, impersonal marble lobby. I stepped out, not as a disgraced executive, but as a combatant whose enemy had just fired the starting gun. They thought they had cornered me. They thought they had taken my power, but all they had done was remove my camouflage. The merger vote was in 7 days. The clock was ticking. My countdown had just begun. Freedom doesn't feel like a breath of fresh air. It feels like the sterile, anonymous air of a pre-booked corporate apartment in a glass tower 20 blocks from Ironvale headquarters. By 11:00 a.m. on Monday, I was sitting in front of a brand-new, shrink-wrapped laptop, paid for in cash from a tech store in a different borough. The apartment was minimalist, all white walls and gray furniture, a place designed for people who were only passing through. It was perfect, a ghost's headquarters. I didn't need Ironvale's servers. The most critical function of any competent risk department is redundancy. For the past 3 years, I had maintained a triple encrypted, offline backup of all sensitive internal audits and financial reviews, a small, featureless black hard drive, no bigger than a deck of cards, which I retrieved from a safe deposit box on my way here. It was my professional insurance policy, connecting it to the clean laptop. I entered a 40-character alphanumeric passphrase and watched as the virtual machine spooled up, a perfect replica of my Ironvale system, hermetically sealed from the outside world. My first target was the file archive for community grants, the official channel for the payments I had flagged going to the Wishwell Foundation. I wasn't looking at the numbers anymore. I was looking for the file's metadata, the digital fingerprints left behind during its creation, and there it was. Embedded in the properties of the PDF payment authorizations was a faint, almost invisible digital watermark. It was a routing code, a string of numbers that meant nothing on its own. But when cross-referenced with my private database of offshore financial institutions, it corresponded to a single corporate account at New Halcyon Bank, a boutique bank in the Cayman Islands known for its discretion and opacity. This was the shell account, the airlock between Ironvale's legitimate books and Veronica's shadow ledger. Accessing New Halcyon's system was impossible, but I didn't need to. My source within the international banking compliance community had, for a hefty price, provided me with anonymized transaction protocols for high-value accounts. I pulled up the protocol for the shell account's specific type. The details were chilling in their technical elegance. Authorizations weren't handled by a simple password. For amounts over a certain threshold, the system required a biometric signature, specifically a voice print. The sign-off authority for the account was listed as a single entity, V. Maddox. And then I saw it. The final piece of the authorization protocol. The system didn't just match the voice. It was triggered by a specific, spoken passphrase. I read the line of text on my screen, and the air in the room seemed to crystallize. Voice phrase ID. Make a wish. It wasn't a guess anymore. It was a fact, codified in the unfeeling logic of a banking system. For years, every time she moved significant funds, every time she skimmed from the company to fuel her slush fund, she had been speaking those 4 words, the same words she had whispered to me in the garage, the same words she had whispered to me in the boardroom. It wasn't just a threat. It was her signature. The past was no longer just a memory. It was Exhibit A. I left the apartment and took a cab to a different bank. One where I kept my own safe deposit box. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, was the microcassette recorder and the small 27-second tape at a specialty audio lab in the city, a place that usually deals with restoring old master recordings for musicians. I had the tape digitized under a strict non-disclosure agreement. The technician, a young man with more piercings than a tackle box, converted the magnetic data into a high-fidelity digital audio file. Back in my sterile apartment, I ran the file through an audio spectral analysis program, the same kind used in forensic science. The software rendered her voice from 15 years ago as a jagged, mountainous waveform on my screen. I isolated the 4 key words: make a wish, the pitch, the cadence, the unique resonant frequencies of her vocal cords. It was all there, a portrait of her voice frozen in time. I then ran a comparative analysis against the technical specifications for the voice print ID required by New Halcyon Bank. The software churned for a moment, comparing the old, analog threat with the modern, digital key. The result flashed on the screen: 94% probability match. It was more than enough. The girl in the garage had recorded the key to a bank vault she didn't even know existed. With the financial weapon secured, I turned to the corporate one, the wellness program. I pulled up the archived chain of emails sent from the generic wellness@ironvale.com address. Buried in the HTML of the mass emails announcing the mandatory seminars was a single, 1x1 pixel tracking image. It was an old marketing trick, designed to see who opened the emails. But this one was more sophisticated. It logged the IP address of the device that downloaded the pixel. Tracing the origin of the mass emails was simple. Every single one had been composed and sent not from the HR department's servers, but from a private network node allocated to the executive suite on the 38th floor, specifically from the terminal in the office of the special advisor to the chairman, Veronica's office. The money trail was just as blatant. I cross-referenced the payroll for the new wellness staff, a dozen names I had never seen before. There were no employment histories, no social security numbers, just payment instructions. The salaries weren't being sent to personal bank accounts. They were being loaded onto a series of virtual, reloadable debit cards, all managed through a single administrator account, the account that received the residual funds from those cards at the end of each month. The Wishwell Foundation, it was a perfect, self-contained loop of fraud. Ironvale paid ghost employees, and the money ended up in Veronica's slush fund. The final step was to see where the money went from there. I focused on the 3 largest disbursements from the Wishwell Foundation in the last quarter, the period when the Arcadium merger talks had intensified. The payments were sent to 3 different entities, all registered in Delaware with opaque ownership structures. But I had my own tools. My risk analysis software scraped global shipping manifests and vendor contracts. Within an hour, I had the connection. All 3 shell companies were listed as logistics subcontractors and equipment vendors for one company, Arcadium Freight. It was bribery, laundered through charity and ghost employees. Veronica wasn't just trying to push me out to settle an old score. She was systematically bribing key stakeholders or decision-makers connected to Arcadium to ensure the merger went through on terms favorable to her and Julius, likely with a massive payout for them personally. I was head of risk. I was the one person who would have inevitably found this. My removal wasn't the goal. It was a necessary prerequisite for the real crime. I had it all: the paper trail, the digital fingerprints, the motive, the voice print that tied Veronica directly to the slush fund. I had the 15-year-old recording that proved the voice was hers. But it wasn't enough. A good lawyer, and Veronica would have the best, could tear it apart. They would call the old tape the vengeful fabrication of a troubled teen. They would claim the voice print was a coincidence, or that she was coerced into setting it up. I had proof of a pattern, but I needed to prove intent. I needed to connect the voice to the behavior, the threat to the crime, the past to the present, in one single, undeniable moment. I looked around the empty, silent apartment. The city lights began to glitter outside the window. They thought I was neutralized, isolated, and powerless, but they were wrong. I had the map of her entire criminal enterprise spread across my screen. The only thing missing was the final piece of evidence. I needed her to say the words again, and I needed her to do it while trying to coerce me. I needed a confession, spoken in her own voice, captured with modern technology, proving the pattern of behavior was still alive. I needed another garage. The hunter must first understand the prey. Veronica's primary weaknesses were not greed or cruelty, but arrogance and an insatiable need for control. She had to know everything, see every angle, and believe she was the one manipulating the board. The trap, therefore, couldn't be a threat. It had to be a tool she would believe she could use. From the sterile confines of my temporary apartment, I began to build the bait. It was a single, exquisitely crafted spreadsheet. I titled it Project Synergon, Phase 2, Redundancy Projections. In bland corporate language, it was a draft layoff list, a projection of the positions that would become redundant after the Arcadium merger was complete. I populated it with 200 names. I included the obvious ones, the overlapping roles in logistics and accounting. Then I added the artistic touches. I included several of Julius's most loyal, long-serving vice presidents, a move that would seem like a ruthless but logical consolidation of power. More importantly, I added a handful of names from the Arcadium side, people I knew, through my research, were thorns in Veronica's side. The list was a weapon she could use to reshape the new company before it was even born. It was irresistible. The final but crucial element was invisible. Embedded in the file was not one, but two tracking mechanisms. The first was a simple, single-pixel image, hosted on a private server I controlled. When the file was opened in any networked environment, or more importantly, when it was sent to a networked printer, that pixel would be fetched, pinging my server with the time and the IP address of the device. The second was a more subtle digital watermark, a faint pattern woven into the spreadsheet's background grid, completely invisible to the naked eye, but easily identifiable by analysis software. It was my proof of authorship. At 3:47 p.m. on Tuesday, I executed the delivery, using a new, anonymous email address masked to look like an internal account, analyst.7b@ironvaledata.com. I composed a short message. The recipient was not Veronica, but her executive assistant, a notoriously flustered and overworked young woman named Clara. The subject was, Urgent, Synergon List for Review. The message was a carefully constructed lie of panicked carelessness. Clara, I'm so sorry. My manager said this had to get to the chairman for sign-off before his 4 p.m. call. Can you please print it and put it on his desk? I'm sending from a remote terminal and can't access the executive printer. Apologies for the rush. The file is attached. The final touch was the CC line. I added vmaddox@ironvale.com. The wrong address for Julius, but the correct one for his wife. It was a mistake no careful analyst would make, but a believable one for a junior employee in a panic. An accidental on-purpose inclusion. I hit send, then I waited. My laptop screen was split in two. On the left, the sent email. On the right, the monitoring software for my private server, displaying a single line of code and a gray inactive status icon. For several long minutes, nothing happened. I imagined the email arriving, Clara opening it, her eyes widening at the sensitive nature of the attachment, her dilemma. Should she follow the instructions? Should she forward it to the correct V-Maddox? Her training would tell her to delete it and report the security breach, but the note's urgency and the powerful name in the CC field would compel her to do exactly what I predicted, forward it to her boss, Veronica. At 3:58 p.m., it happened. The gray status icon on my screen blinked and turned a brilliant, vivid green. The line of code below it populated with a timestamp and an IP address. The address was registered to the executive printer pool on the 38th floor of the Iron Vale Tower. She hadn't just opened it, she had printed it. She wanted a hard copy, something she could hold, study, and use. The fish had not only taken the bait, it had leaped into the boat. 11 minutes. That's all it took for her paranoia and ambition to override any sense of caution. I let her sit with it for 5 hours. I let her imagine the power that document gave her. I let her scenarios run wild. At 9:01 p.m., I used a burner phone to send her a text message. The language was precise, each word a carefully chosen lure. I have something you'll want, the original file, and its distribution list. Garage level B5, Iron Vale Tower, 9:13 p.m. Come alone. Bring your pen. The location was a deliberate echo, a psychological anchor to the past. The time, oddly specific, was meant to convey precision and control. Bring your pen framed the meeting as a transaction, not a confrontation. She would believe I was there to sell my silence. I was in place by 9:05 p.m. The underground garage at the Iron Vale Tower was a vast concrete cavern, eerily silent at night. The air was cold and smelled of curing concrete and the faint tang of exhaust. I parked my rental car, a nondescript dark gray sedan, next to a thick, load-bearing pillar, its surface scarred with a web of cracks. It offered a sliver of shadow. Before getting out, I reached under the lapel of my jacket and pressed a small, nearly invisible button. A tiny LED on the device, a high-definition body camera, blinked once and then went dark. It was now recording both audio and video, the modern equivalent of the silver microcassette recorder, but infinitely more powerful. I leaned against the cold concrete of the pillar and waited. My heartbeat was a slow, steady drum. This was not the panicked, adrenaline-fueled terror of 15 years ago. This was the patient, focused calm of a predator waiting for the prey to walk into the kill zone. At precisely 9:13 p.m., I heard the sound, a sound that transcended time, echoing from the past into this concrete tomb, the sharp, rhythmic click-clack of a woman's heels on concrete. It was the same metronomic, confident pace I remembered from my 18th birthday. She emerged from the elevator bank, a solitary figure in the harsh fluorescent light. She wore a tailored black coat, and she was, as instructed, alone. Her arrogance was her blind spot. She couldn't imagine a scenario where she wasn't the one in control. She stopped about 10 feet away from me, her face a mask of cold amusement. "Harper, this is dramatic, even for you. A garage? You're letting your sentimentality get the better of you." I didn't react to the jibe. I pushed myself off the pillar and held up a manila folder. The list I sent was a copy. I have the original file on a drive in this folder, and the server logs showing exactly where it's been sent. This was a lie, but a necessary one. It seems a few board members and a journalist at the Financial Times were accidentally included on the distribution list. Her smile tightened. The amusement vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine anger. "What do you want?" "The merger is everything to you and Julius," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "A leak of this magnitude, right before the vote? It would be catastrophic. The board would demand an investigation. The deal with Arcadium would collapse." I took a step closer. "But it doesn't have to. One signature from you, and this all goes away. The file is deleted, the logs are wiped, and the merger goes smoothly." She let out a short, sharp laugh, but it was brittle. I had her. The bait was too good. She saw a path to victory, a way to silence me and get what she wanted. This was the moment, the apex of her arrogance. She took a step toward me, her face lit from above by the humming fluorescent light, casting sharp shadows under her cheekbones. She leaned in, just as she had in the boardroom, just as she had in the other garage. Her voice dropped to that familiar, venomous whisper. "Make a—" She stopped herself. A sliver of caution, a last-ditch defense mechanism, kicked in. Her eyes narrowed. "Make a what? What's the condition? Harper? What's your price?" I didn't answer. Instead, I slowly opened the manila folder. Inside was not a hard drive, but a single document, clipped to the cardboard backing. It was a contract, drafted by my lawyer. It looked official, full of dense legal clauses. It was, in essence, a non-disclosure agreement combined with a consulting contract, promising me a 7-figure sum to provide transitional advisory services and then disappear permanently. It was the kind of dirty, golden handshake deal she would understand. I held it out to her, along with a pen. "The price is your signature, but the contract is only valid with a verbal authorization, a security measure. You understand. You have to state the activation phrase clearly for my recorder. Standard practice for a deal of this nature." Her eyes scanned the document, then looked back at my face. She saw the money, the solution to her problem, the final humiliation of buying me off. She thought she was winning. She thought this was her victory. I pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the page. Right below a small block of text that read, "By signing below, I verbally affirm the activation phrase for this agreement." "You just have to say the words, Veronica," I said softly. "It's the only way." She took the folder from my hands, her eyes gleaming with triumph. The pen was in her hand. The trap was about to close. Veronica held the pen like a scepter. Triumph radiated from her, a palpable, suffocating aura. She looked from the counterfeit contract back to my face, a final, gloating assessment of her defeated stepdaughter. This, in her mind, was the end of it, a simple transaction to erase a nuisance. She took a small, theatrical breath, savoring the moment. "All right, Harper, for the record," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, her lips curling into a smug smile. She spoke the words clearly, enunciating each syllable with the precision of a CEO closing a deal. "Make a wish." As the last syllable left her lips, a subtle vibration came from the watch on my wrist. On its dark screen, a small, discreet app I had commissioned for this single purpose completed its analysis. The audio, streamed in real time from the body camera on my lapel, was instantly compared against the biometric parameters of the new Halcyon Bank's security protocol. 2 waveforms appeared on the screen for a fraction of a second. One, a green template, the other, a white, live sample of her voice. They overlapped with near-perfect symmetry. Below them, a single line of text glowed in stark white. Voice print signature. Validated. Confidence. 98.7%. She clicked the pen and leaned forward to sign the document, her victory complete in her mind. But I didn't let her. "Wait," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "One more thing, a piece of nostalgia. You could say—" Her eyes narrowed, the pen hovering over the signature line. Before she could protest, I raised my phone, my thumb already hovering over the screen. I tapped play. The sound that emerged from the phone's small speaker was tinny, distorted by age and the limitations of 1990s technology. It was a soundscape of ghosts. First, the rustle of denim, the heavy, groaning thud of a closing garage door, the faint, rhythmic click, click, click of fingernails on metal. Veronica froze. Her face, a moment ago so full of triumphant arrogance, went slack with confusion, then dawning recognition. Her head tilted, as if trying to place a half-forgotten song. And then came the voice, her own voice, yet not, younger, sharper, laced with a casual cruelty that 15 years of corporate polish had smoothed away. It echoed in the concrete cavern, a spectral duet with her present-day self. "Make a wish." The recording continued, the sound of a shove, A muffled impact, a sharp, stolen gasp of my own breath. 27 seconds of auditory history, playing out in the space between us. On the screen of my phone, I had the spectral analysis software running. The waveform of the old recording, the jagged, analog ghost, was displayed in blue as the recording played. A new, red waveform from the live microphone feed tracked alongside it. When the two phrases overlapped, the live one she had just spoken and the recorded one from the past, the two waves locked together, a near-perfect superimposition, a visual representation of a pattern, unbroken by time, a single voice, a single threat, separated by a decade and a half of silence. "What is this?" she hissed, her face pale. The pen in her hand was now a dead weight. While her attention was fixed on the audio, my fingers were moving on the lower half of my phone's screen. I swiped away the audio app, bringing up a second, custom-built application. It had a brutally simple interface, a single button labeled Execute. This button was linked via a secure API to a newly opened account at New Halcyon Bank, my Bait account. Pressing it would trigger an automated transfer request of $1 from the Wishwell Foundation's primary account to mine, using the most recently validated voice print signature as its sole authorization key. Her mind was reeling, trying to process the sound from the past. My world was silent, focused on the digital present. I pressed the button. For 2 agonizing seconds, a small icon on the screen spun. Then, it turned into a green checkmark. A new screen appeared. It was a simple, text-based transaction log, pulled directly from the bank's server. Transaction ID 77B1X90C. Amount $1,000. USD. From ACC 9822. Wishwell Foundation. To ACC 450. H. Cole. Status. Confirmed authorization. Voice ID signature. V.M. With 2 quick taps, I took a screenshot. The image was automatically encrypted, time-stamped with a cryptographic hash to make it legally irrefutable, and uploaded to a secure cloud server accessible only by my lawyer. The entire process took less than 5 seconds. Veronica finally found her voice, forcing a laugh that sounded like tearing metal. "A dusty old tape? That's your master plan? That is proof of absolutely nothing, you pathetic girl. It's inadmissible. It's meaningless." I lowered the phone, my eyes meeting hers. The cold, dead calm I felt seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst would have. "It's not proof of an event, Veronica," I said, my voice level and precise, the voice I used when explaining catastrophic risk to the board. "It's proof of a pattern. This tape," I held up the phone, "proves that 15 years ago, you used a specific phrase under coercive circumstances, and this," I gestured to the air around us, to the body camera on my chest, "proves you used the exact same phrase tonight, under coercive circumstances." I took a step closer, my voice dropping. "And that pattern is the key, because that same vocal pattern, that exact phrase, is the voice print signature you used to authorize fund transfers out of the Wishwell Foundation, the same foundation you've been funding with Iron Veil's ghost payroll for your wellness program, the same foundation that has been making 3 very large, very illegal payments to vendors associated with Arcadium Freight." Each statement was a hammer blow. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the frantic search for an escape route, for a lie that would hold. She was trapped, and she knew it. It was in that moment that a security vehicle, making its nightly rounds, turned the corner at the far end of the garage. Its headlights swept across the cavern, a sudden, blinding bar of white light that pinned us like insects. Veronica's reaction was not that of a CEO, it was primal, instinctive. The mask of corporate civility shattered, and the woman from the old garage reappeared. She lunged forward and grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh with painful, desperate force. "Give me the phone!" she snarled, her face contorted in a mask of fury. It was the exact same motion she'd used to shove me all those years ago, a violent, possessive act of physical intimidation. The sweeping headlights illuminated the scene perfectly. Her hand clamped on my arm, the snarl on her face, my own impassive expression, the body camera, angled perfectly, captured everything, the voice, the assault, the location, the entire pattern, verbal and physical, encapsulated in one beautifully clear, high-definition recording. The security car continued on its way. Oblivious, the moment of crisis passed. Veronica seemed to realize what she had done, her hand recoiling as if burned. The mask was back in place, but it was cracked and ill-fitting now. I didn't flinch. I didn't even rub my arm. I simply looked down at the marks her fingers had left, then back up at her. And then, I reached into my pocket, my eyes still locked on hers, and pulled out my other phone, the burner. My thumb moved over the keypad. I typed a single, 3-letter word to my lawyer. Go! I pressed send. The gears were now in motion. The hunt was over. The war had just begun. The Horizon Hall on the 38th floor was designed to project an image of serene, unassailable power. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of North Alder, a god's-eye perspective on the city below. At 9:00 a.m., the long mahogany table was filled with the most powerful people in the company, the board of directors, key shareholders, and the executive team. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and the palpable tension that precedes a multi-billion-dollar decision. Julius stood at the head of the table, the very picture of confident leadership. He was pushing the agenda hard, his voice a smooth baritone that brooked no argument. And so, with the due diligence complete and the synergies clearly identified, I see no reason to delay. I moved to bring the vote on the Arcadium freight merger to the floor. He was trying to create an air of inevitability, to rush past any potential dissent. Several board members nodded in agreement. Veronica, seated to his right, looked calm, almost bored, as if the outcome was a foregone conclusion. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second, a flicker of a triumphant smile playing on her lips. She thought I was neutralized, a non-entity watching from the sidelines. I was, after all, still on administrative leave, allowed to attend only as a non-voting observer due to my senior position. This was the moment. "Mr. Chairman," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs of assent. It wasn't loud, but it was clear and cold, and it made every head in the room turn in my direction. Julius's smile tightened. "Harper, this is a shareholder meeting. Your participation is not required at this juncture." "With respect, sir," I replied, standing slowly. "I wish to invoke Section 4, subsection C of the corporate bylaws, the Risk Exceptions Protocol. It allows the head of risk to present material findings directly to the shareholders if there is reason to believe those findings have been deliberately withheld from the board." A stunned silence fell over the room. It was an obscure, rarely used protocol, a nuclear option designed for precisely this kind of corporate malfeasance. The General Counsel, a man named Marcus Thorne, blinked slowly and then nodded. "She is correct. Mr. Chairman, the protocol is valid. If Ms. Cole is formally invoking it, we are required to hear her." He then added a crucial detail, looking at the technician in the corner. "And according to that same protocol, all internal cameras and audio must be actively recording for the official record." The small red light on the camera mounted in the ceiling blinked on. We were now on the record. Julius's face was a thundercloud. "Very well, Ms. Cole, the floor is yours. But be warned, this board does not take kindly to theatrical interruptions." I walked to the podium at the front of the room, my personal tablet in my hand. I connected it to the main display. "Thank you. My presentation will be brief," I said, looking not at Julius or Veronica, but at the collected faces of the shareholders. It concerns undisclosed liabilities and breaches of internal financial controls directly related to the proposed merger. I clicked the first slide into view. It was a simple, brutal flowchart. On the left was the Iron Veil Logistics logo. An arrow pointed from it to a box labeled Wishwell Foundation, from Wishwell. A spray of arrows pointed to a cloud of logos for virtual debit card providers. From that cloud, a final set of thick, red arrows pointed to 3 boxes on the right, each labeled with the name of a known Arcadium freight vendor. Slide 1, I began, my voice as clinical as if I were describing a weather pattern. This is a map of a secondary, off-book payment system. Iron Veil funds, disguised as charitable donations, are routed through the Wishwell Foundation. These funds are then used to load anonymous, untraceable virtual debit cards. I paused as murmurs rippled through the room. Those cards are then used to make payments to key subcontractors and vendors of Arcadium Freight. In essence, a bribery and influence scheme to ensure the merger's approval. I clicked to the next slide. It was a screenshot of Iron Veil's payroll system, showing the list of wellness staff, alongside a scanned document. The articles of incorporation for a P.O. box in Veronica's name. The addresses matched perfectly. Slide 2. The funding mechanism for this scheme, a ghost payroll, implemented under the guise of a corporate wellness program. The salaries for these non-existent employees are the primary source of revenue for the Wishwell Foundation. The program was initiated and is exclusively managed by the Office of the Special Advisor to the Chairman, Veronica Maddox. Veronica did not flinch, but a muscle in her jaw tightened. Julius looked as if he had swallowed acid. "This is all circumstantial," a board member loyal to Julius interjected. "Flowcharts and coincidences." "I agree," I said calmly, which brings me to slide 3, authorization. I clicked again. The screen was now black. Then, a single, jagged blue waveform appeared across the middle. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat before I played the audio. The tinny, ghost-like recording of Veronica's voice from 15 years ago filled the silent, executive boardroom. Make a wish. Then, a second waveform, a crisp, clean red line, appeared directly below the first, the live recording from the garage, the night before. I played it. Make a wish. The top sample, I explained, was recorded on my 18th birthday. The bottom sample was recorded last night, in the B5 parking garage of this building, during a meeting where Mrs. Maddox attempted to coerce me into suppressing evidence in exchange for a financial settlement. As you can see, the vocal pattern is identical, because the voice is identical. General Counsel Marcus Thorne leaned forward, speaking to the board, but looking at me. "From a governance perspective," he said slowly, his legal mind connecting the dots. "The issue here is the documented pattern. A voice print, in and of itself, is simply data. But a voice print combined with a documented history of coercive behavior represents a catastrophic breach of internal controls. It suggests that any financial transaction authorized by that voice print may have been executed under duress or for illicit purposes." That was the turning point. This was no longer a family drama. It was a legal crisis. A man in the front row, a representative from the largest pension fund that held Iron Veil stock, raised his hand. "Mr. Chairman, in light of these deeply disturbing allegations, I move to table the vote on the Arcadium merger indefinitely. Furthermore, I propose the immediate formation of a special committee, with independent oversight, to investigate these claims." "This is an outrage!" Julius slammed his hand on the table, his face flushed with rage. "This is a baseless fabrication by a disgruntled employee, a pathetic attempt at revenge. There is no proof of any financial wrongdoing." "On the contrary, Mr. Chairman," I said, my voice cutting through his tirade, "there is proof." I advanced to my final slide. The screen now showed the screenshot from my phone. The new Halcyon Bank transaction log, stark and undeniable in black and white text. Transaction ID 77B1X90C, amount $1,000, USD. Status, confirmed authorization, voice ID signature, VM. "This is a transaction log from last night," I stated, letting them read the damning line. "A $1 transfer from the Wishwell Foundation, authorized moments after Mrs. Maddox spoke the activation phrase. The bank's system accepted her voice as the key. This is not a fabrication. This is a real-time, cryptographically verified bank record. her voice, her foundation, her crime. The room fell into a dead, profound silence. The game was over. Julius stared at the screen, his face ashen. Veronica looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not hatred, but fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. I turned away from the screen and faced the shareholders. "I have 3 recommendations for this board to consider before we conclude," I said, my voice steady and strong. "First, the immediate suspension of Veronica Maddox from all duties and her removal from all company property, pending the results of the investigation. Second, a court order to freeze all assets of the Wishwell Foundation and its subsidiaries. And third, the formal launch of an independent, external investigation, with all findings to be submitted to the appropriate regulatory and law enforcement agencies." I took a breath. The risk is no longer theoretical. It is active. The choice is yours. The silence in the Horizon Hall was a living thing, heavy and absolute. The shareholders stared at the screen, then at me, then at the ashen face of Julius Maddox. The $1 transaction was not an accusation. It was a verdict. It was a mathematical proof of guilt, rendered in the cold, binary language of a bank server. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the faint, mechanical hum of the room's climate control. Julius slumped in his chair, a man hollowed out from the inside. The fight had gone out of him, but Veronica was not made of the same pliable material. She was forged in a different fire, and surrender was not in her vocabulary. She rose to her feet, her back ramrod straight, her eyes blazing with a desperate, cornered fury. "This is a performance," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength with every word. She wasn't speaking to the board anymore. She was playing to an imaginary jury, to a court of public opinion. A sick, twisted performance by a young woman I tried to raise as my own. She has resented me for 15 years, and she has concocted this theatrical fantasy to destroy my family and this company. She turned her venomous gaze on me. "That tape? A fabrication. A relic from her teenage histrionics, when she was, I am sorry to say, a deeply troubled and manipulative girl. She claims I was violent. It's a disgusting lie. She is twisting a moment of adolescent drama into a weapon to fuel her corporate coup. She is using a fabricated story of abuse to exact a personal revenge. I ask this board, are you going to let the future of this great company be decided by the bitter, unsubstantiated lies of a vengeful stepdaughter?" Her strategy was clear. Pivot from the undeniable corporate crime to the unprovable family drama. Discredit the witness, poison the well. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. She was introducing the one thing a boardroom fears more than anything: messy, emotional, human ambiguity. I let her finish, my expression unchanged. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. When she was done, the room silent once more. I simply turned back to the podium. "Mrs. Maddox is correct about one thing," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "This is not about a 15-year-old family dispute. This is about a legal document." I pressed a button, and a new image appeared on the screen. It was a scanned PDF, yellowed with age, bearing the letterhead of a family law firm in Crest Hollow. The title at the top was clear: Temporary Guardianship Affidavit. This is a document my father had drawn up when I was 17, a few months before my 18th birthday. He was scheduled for a business trip overseas and, as a formality, he assigned temporary legal guardianship to Veronica. She signed it. I zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the page. It was her familiar, looping hand, a perfect match to the one on my birthday card. "It's a standard document," I continued, "except for one non-standard clause my father's lawyer insisted on including. It's on page 3, section 7, subparagraph B." I zoomed in on the text. The dense legalese was suddenly stark and clear on the massive screen. In the event that the assigned guardian, Veronica Kingsley, her maiden name, engages in any act of physical violence or coercive behavior toward the minor, Harper Cole, all rights, privileges, and appointments granted to the guardian under any and all of testator's existing estate planning instruments, including trusts and wills, shall be rendered permanently null and void." A low murmur went through the room. They didn't understand the implication yet. "A simple safety clause," I said. "But it has a very specific financial consequence. You see, my father had also established a trust for me. That trust contained a number of assets, but the most significant was a 4% equity stake in a then-fledgling shipping company he had invested in as an angel investor, a company called Iron Veil Logistics." A sharp intake of breath came from the pension fund manager in the front row. "According to the terms of the trust," I went on, my voice like ice, "if I were to pass away before the age of 30 without heirs, the contents of the trust would pass to a secondary beneficiary, standard practice. My father named Veronica as that beneficiary." I paused, letting the pieces click into place in their minds. So, when she signed this affidavit, she was not just my temporary guardian, she was also the contingent beneficiary of a trust that held 4% of this company's stock, and she agreed, in writing, that any act of violence would void that status. I looked directly at Veronica. Her face was a mask of chalky white. "The recording from my 18th birthday," I said, "is no longer just a memory of a family dispute. It is now evidence of the triggering event for this clause. But a good lawyer could argue that away, which is why the recording from last night in the garage is so critical, because it proves a continuous, unbroken pattern of coercive behavior. It proves that the woman who violated this affidavit 15 years ago is the same woman who assaulted me last night to suppress evidence." I gestured to the general counsel. "The security guard who witnessed the event last night has already given a statement to your legal team." Now came the final brutal connection. But here is the most important question. After Veronica violated that clause, what happened to her status as the secondary beneficiary? It should have been voided, but it wasn't, because 2 years after my father's death, an amendment was filed to the trust, a legal maneuver, executed by Veronica as my former guardian and the new wife of the CEO, changed the secondary beneficiary from Veronica Maddox to a nonprofit organization. I let the silence stretch, hang, and then break. "The secondary beneficiary for the trust that holds 4% of this company's stock," I said, each word a nail in her coffin, "is, and has been for the last decade, the Wishwell Foundation." The room erupted. It wasn't just a corporate crime anymore. It was a breathtakingly long con. This wasn't a recent scheme to grease a merger. It was a decade-long plot to steal my inheritance, using her legal status as my guardian as the tool. She had funneled my legacy, the 4% of Iron Veil my father had left me, into the very same slush fund she was using to bribe her way into the Arcadium deal. The family secret was not separate from the corporate crime. The family secret was the corporate crime's origin story. The neutral bloc of shareholders shifted as one. The debate was over. All eyes turned to Julius. He looked from his wife's terrified face to the damning evidence on the screen, to the furious faces of the men and women who controlled his company. The weight of it all finally broke him. He looked at the general counsel, his voice a hollowed-out thing. "The company, we will cooperate fully with any investigation." It was a complete surrender. Marcus Thorne, the general counsel, stood up, his face grim. He read from a prepared statement that had clearly been drafted the moment he received my lawyer's package that morning. "By the emergency powers vested in this board, I hereby formalize the resolution. 1. Veronica Maddox is suspended indefinitely, effective immediately, from all roles and responsibilities at Iron Veil Logistics. 2. The board officially withdraws its proposal for the Arcadium freight merger and cancels the shareholder vote. 3. A special committee of independent directors will be formed to oversee a full external investigation." He sat down. It was over. The company security guards, who had been waiting discreetly by the door, stepped forward and walked toward Veronica. As they approached her, I looked across the table at her. One last time. I thought of her favorite phrase, the one she had wielded like a weapon for so long, and I gave it back to her, repurposed, as my final verdict. "You always said it, Veronica," I said. my voice just loud enough for the recording devices to pick it up clearly. Family is leverage. I paused as the guards reached her side. Unless it's evidence. The call came in the late afternoon. From a number listed only as unknown, I answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was a ruin, a collapsed and hollowed-out version of the one I knew. The imperious, velvet-coated tone was gone, replaced by a dry, rasping whisper. It was Veronica. "B5, she said, the single word catching in her throat. "One last time. I just need to talk." It wasn't a summons or a command. It was a plea from a ghost. I didn't reply. I simply disconnected the call and picked up my keys. I went alone. The body camera was still pinned to the inside of my jacket, its lens a single, dead eye. Habit. I switched it on as I stepped into the elevator. The quiet hum of its recording a familiar, almost comforting presence. But I didn't need it anymore. The evidence had been gathered. The case had been made. This was not an operation. This was an epilogue. The B5 level of the garage was just as I had left it the night before. A concrete tomb, cold and silent, smelling of stale air and gasoline. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed their monotonous, lonely song. I saw her standing near the same cracked concrete pillar, a solitary figure adrift in a sea of empty parking spaces. She was no longer wearing the severe, powerful attire of the boardroom. She was in a simple gray coat, looking smaller, diminished, as if the loss of her power had physically shrunk her. I stopped about 15 feet away, the space between us charged with the weight of unspoken history. She didn't speak for a long moment. Her hands trembled as she reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out. It was a photograph, its glossy surface catching the harsh overhead light. She held it out to me. "I found this morning, in an old box." I didn't take it, so she walked slowly forward and placed it in my unresisting hand. I looked down. The image was a punch of memory, faded and garishly colored. It was me, on my 18th birthday. A younger, more fragile version of myself, with a forced, brittle smile. I was sitting in front of a cake, a monstrosity of buttercream roses and blue piping, and there, scrawled across the top in sugary, looping cursive, were the words, the 4 words that had become the central axis of my life. Make a wish. I stared at the image of the girl who had no idea what was waiting for her in the garage just a few hours after that picture was taken. I felt a distant, clinical pity for her, but no connection. She was a stranger from another life. "You were so beautiful," Veronica whispered, her voice a hoarse crackle. "I wanted to give you the world." I continued to stare at the photograph, at the lie captured in its glossy emulsion. "You could let this go. Harper," she said, her voice dropping, attempting one last, desperate manipulation. "You could show mercy. You could forgive me." The words hung in the cold, dead air. Forgive. Mercy. Words from a language I no longer spoke, from a world that no longer existed. They were abstract concepts, as meaningless as the promises of a ghost. I lifted my eyes from the photograph and met hers. They were bloodshot, stripped of all their former power, filled with nothing but raw, primal fear. She was finally, truly afraid. I gently took the photograph between my thumb and forefinger and placed it back into her trembling palm, folding her fingers over it. "You should have wished for something legal," I said. My voice was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was simply a statement of fact, as cold and hard as the concrete floor beneath our feet. For a single, terrifying second, the old Veronica returned. The mask of desperation fell away, and a flash of pure, undiluted rage contorted her features. Her arm shot out, her hand open, not to push this time, but to strike. It was a reflexive, violent spasm, the last act of a creature that knew only how to attack. But I was not the girl from the first garage. I didn't flinch. I didn't cower. I simply took one calm, deliberate step backward. Her hand sliced through the empty air where my face had been. The momentum of her swing threw her off balance, and she stumbled forward, catching herself on the pillar. In that same instant, I pressed the small duress button on my Iron Veil access card in my pocket. A silent, digital signal shot from the garage to the central security desk. Before Veronica could even straighten up, they were there. 2 uniformed security officers, moving with silent, practiced efficiency from the stairwell entrance. They hadn't run. They had simply appeared, as if summoned from the shadows. Veronica stared at them, her mouth slightly agape, the fight draining out of her as quickly as it had appeared. She offered no resistance as one of the guards took her arm gently but firmly. The other guard produced a pair of handcuffs. There was a soft, metallic click, followed by a faint, ratcheting sound as the cuffs were tightened. Zzzz. It was a quiet, mechanical noise, a sound of process and consequence. It was nothing like the sharp, menacing click-clack of her fingernails against the garage door all those years ago. That sound had been a countdown to terror. This sound was a final, quiet period at the end of a long, painful sentence. They began to lead her away. She didn't look back. I stood alone in the vast, empty space. I tilted my head back and looked up at the stained concrete ceiling, at the exposed pipes and electrical conduits. I breathed in, smelling the cocktail of dust, dampness, and exhaust fumes. I waited for the familiar clench in my stomach, the tightening in my chest, the cold sweat of memory. But nothing came. The fear was gone. The garage was no longer a tomb or a cage. It was just a room, a place of concrete and steel. Stripped of its power, its ghosts finally banished, it held no more power over me. As if on cue, a low, grinding rumble began. I turned. The massive, corrugated steel door at the far end of the garage, the same one that had once closed to seal me in darkness, was now rising. It moved slowly, ponderously, revealing a slice of the outside world. A blinding, brilliant white light flooded the cavernous space, chasing the shadows into the corners and making me squint. It was the harsh, clean light of the late afternoon sun, a startling, almost holy whiteness against the gloom. It wasn't just light. It felt like a cleansing, a scouring of the past. The door continued its ascent, the rectangle of light growing, promising a world outside this concrete box. It felt like a different kind of birthday, a new beginning, granted not by a wish on a cake, but forged in silence, patience, and a refusal to forget. The door reached the top, and I walked toward the light, leaving the garage, and the girl I used to be, behind me for good. The room they chose for the special committee hearing was not the Horizon Hall. It was a smaller, interior conference room on a lower floor, a place with no windows and no view. The walls were paneled in a dark, sound-absorbing wood, and the only light came from recessed fixtures in the ceiling, casting a sterile, even glow on the faces around the table. This was not a room for projecting power or admiring a skyline. This was a room for autopsies. The committee was comprised of 3 independent board members, stern-faced men and women who looked more like judges than executives. My lawyer, David Finch, sat beside me, a silent, reassuring presence. Julius was there, looking 10 years older than he had a week ago, his own legal counsel at his side. The chair of the committee, a woman with iron-gray hair and an expression of profound impatience, looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "Ms. Cole," she said, her voice dry as paper. "The committee has reviewed the extensive documentation provided by your counsel, including the financial forensics, the digital evidence, and the sworn statements. For the record, is there anything you wish to add in your own words?" I rose slowly, my hands resting on the back of my chair. I didn't look at Julius. I didn't need to. I addressed the chair, and through her, the silent, invisible record being made. My statement was not for them. It was for the girl in the garage. It was the final entry in a logbook that had been open for 15 years. "I have only one thing to say," I began, my voice clear and steady in the silent room. 15 years ago, on my 18th birthday, I was asked to make a wish. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. letting them connect to the evidence they had already read. I wished for daylight. I sat back down. There was nothing more to say. David gave my arm a slight, imperceptible squeeze under the table. The chair held my gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod, as if I had just confirmed a complex legal theory. She shuffled the papers in front of her and cleared her throat. "Thank you, Ms. Cole," she said. She then put on her glasses and began to read in a formal, dispassionate monotone. After a thorough and expedited review of the evidence presented, the Special Committee of the Board of Directors of Iron Vale Logistics has reached a unanimous decision, effective immediately. Veronica Maddox is permanently terminated from all positions, roles, and associations with this company and its subsidiaries for gross misconduct, including but not limited to misappropriation of corporate funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to commit fraud. She took a breath. Furthermore, the committee has voted to turn over its complete findings, including all evidence of bribery, witness tampering, and embezzlement, to the Office of the District Attorney and the Securities and Exchange Commission, with a recommendation for immediate criminal investigation. Across the table, Julius seemed to shrink. He didn't protest. He didn't speak. He simply lowered his eyes and stared at his hands, folded on the polished surface of the table. He was a king who had just watched his kingdom, and his queen, burn to the ground. The chair removed her glasses. "This meeting is adjourned." There was no explosion of activity. There was only a quiet, final kind of emptiness. The committee members gathered their papers and filed out of the room without a word, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. It wasn't the sound of victory. It was the sound of a storm that had passed, leaving a strange and unsettling calm in its wake. My lawyer packed his briefcase, gave me a final nod, and left me alone in the silent, wood-paneled room. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing in the sterile, recycled air. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was clean. It was the silence of a room that had been scrubbed and disinfected, every trace of the disease now gone. Slowly, I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers found the familiar, hard plastic edges of the microcassette. I pulled it out and looked at it one last time. 27 seconds of tape, spooled between two tiny plastic wheels, an artifact from a forgotten war. It had been my sword and my shield, my secret and my shame. Now, it was just a piece of plastic. From my purse, I took a small, stiff evidence envelope. With a pen from the table, I wrote a single line on the front, Exhibit A, retired. I dropped the cassette into the envelope and sealed the flap. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt only the quiet, profound relief of laying down a heavy burden, a weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying until it was gone. I walked out of the conference room and into the long, glass-walled corridor. On the other side of the thick plate glass, the city of North Alder hummed with its usual, indifferent energy. Cars moved in silent, orderly lines on the streets far below. A helicopter sliced through the afternoon sky. The world hadn't stopped. It hadn't even noticed. This colossal, world-ending event in my life was, to the rest of the world, just another Tuesday. And there was a strange comfort in that. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text message from a source on the board. Merger vote officially canceled. Arcadium deal is dead. I read the words, then slid the phone back into my pocket without replying. It didn't matter anymore. It was just a footnote. I walked to the elevator bank and pressed the button. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside the empty car, the doors closing me into the small, silent space. The car began its smooth, silent descent. Alone, suspended between the 38th floor and the ground, I saw my reflection in the polished steel. It was just me, not the girl in the garage, not the head of risk, not the architect of a corporate downfall, just me, Harper Cole, free. I leaned my head back against the cool wall and let out a breath I had been holding for 15 years, a whisper, meant only for me and for the ghosts that no longer haunted the machine, escaped my lips. Wish granted. The doors closed. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect over our shared thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help this story reach even more people, please support it by hitting the hype button. Your support means the world.